Shelf cooking does not have to be boring. In today's video, I'm going to show you 3 really simple recipes as I try to empty out my fridge, my freezer, and my pantry before a house move. So let's dive in. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Simple Essentials, and an extra warm welcome to all the new subscribers that have joined in the last week. It's so exciting to see you all here. If you're new to the channel, my name is Emmy, and I share stuff to help you simplify your life in as many ways as possible. And today specifically, we're going to talk about food and budget, healthy meal planning stuff. So I shared in a previous video, which I will link up here as well as down below, that we are in the process of building a house, moving out of our current apartment, and putting pretty much everything we own in storage for the better part of a year. And part of this process is for me to run down the food supplies that I have in my fridge, freezer, and pantry to make sure that we're not wasting food, we're eating healthy, because let's face it, getting ready for a move is always a bit stressful. So I'm going to share with you 3 super simple recipes today that I make reasonably often, and I'm pretty sure that with whatever you have in your pantry, you could make a modification of these dishes with what you have on hand. So let's dive into the recipes. We are going to get started with the lentil soup, and this is a great budget-friendly recipe, especially as we're going into winter here in Australia where I live. So we've got all my ingredients ready and cut up here. We've got some herbs, I've got some onion, we've got my lentils. This is red lentils, you can use brown lentils or any other kind you like. And the main difference between this and the original recipe is that instead of using celery, I'll be using potato, because that's what I had on hand, and I'll be using vegetable stock cubes instead of vegetable broth. So just getting my onion started in a little bit of oil in the pot that I'm going to be cooking the soup in. The recipe calls for brown onion, but I had some red onion on hand that I needed to use up, so I added that as well. And once your onion's been cooking for a couple of minutes, you want to add your garlic, fresh or minced like the one I'm using here, and give that a good stir to combine it. And then the thing that really makes this soup beautiful is that you're going to add some tomato paste to your onion and garlic. And before you add the other ingredients, you want to add your tomato paste and really kind of coat the onion and garlic in it on fairly low heat, as you'll see here. So once that's nice and coated and it gets so fragrant, you can really smell it in the whole kitchen. It's really, really beautiful. So once that all is going, I'm going to add my stock. So I had 5 stock cubes in that cup of water, and then I'm just going to add additional water, so 1 cup per stock cube. If you want this to be more of a very liquidy soup, you can add more liquid than that as well if you need to. Then I'm chucking in my vegetables. This is the point where you'd add the celery as well if you use that. And then you're just adding the herbs. You can use fresh herbs if you happen to have access to that in your garden. I don't at the moment, so I'm just using these dried herbs instead. And you can obviously vary this as well. I didn't add any chili or anything like that to make it particularly spicy, but you obviously could. So this is kind of what it looks like. You want to bring that up to a simmer and let it simmer for about half an hour until the lentils become nice and soft, and however you prefer them. So about half an hour or so looks something like this. And then you want to transfer that to a bowl, because unless you like chunky soup, you want to blend this down to make it a little bit more smooth. So I just added a little bit of lemon juice. It's really nice to add this at the end here. And then just blend it with a stick blender to your liking, however smooth you prefer it to be. And I tell you, this is just such a beautiful, comforting winter food, especially if you're not feeling 100%. And I served this up with some of the bread, which I'll show you in a second how I made. And it was really, really tasty and filling, and made quite a few portions. Next up is the fried rice, which is one of my favorite budget meals because you can vary it however you like. But today I'm going to be using some eggs, I'm going to be using some milk, and when it comes to seasonings, you can obviously use whatever you want. In this case, I'm using coconut aminos instead of soy sauce, some sesame oil, a bit of oyster sauce that was hanging out of my fridge. And I've got these cooked peeled prawns, half a bag of them, that I'm going to use. I've got my brown rice already cooked and cooling, because ideally you want it to be cold. And I've got some mixed vegetables and onion to use as well, and a little bit of garlic and ginger just for for the flavor. Now you can obviously use any vegetable and any protein that you like. This is just what I normally do. So I always start by cutting up my vegetables. In this case, because I'm using frozen vegetables, the only thing I need to cut up is my onion. So I'm going to cut that up real quick and get that all ready. Quite often I will use things like fresh carrot and things like that. So you want to cut that up if you are using that in nice little pieces and get that going. And then in a pan, I just get my oil going. So I'm going to start with my scrambled eggs. Normally what I do is 1 egg per adult per portion when I'm doing scrambled eggs. So I'm going to make about 6 portions worth of fried rice here. I was also going to use the other milk, but it was very smelly and yucky when I opened that. So I'm going with almond milk instead, but you can do scrambled eggs with just a little bit of water if you don't have any milk on hand or if you don't like milk. And then just some salt and pepper in the eggs as well. Now remember here not to overcook your scramble because this is going to go back in the pot in a little bit. But I like to get it to about this texture, and then I'm going to transfer that to a plate on the side there, as you can see. And now I'm just getting some sesame oil and a little bit of olive oil in my pan, and I'm going to start on my onions and my proteins. So chucking the onions in there on kind of medium to high heat and getting that all started. As you know, onion likes a little bit of a head start. Adding garlic is usually good to do a little bit later so it doesn't burn. So just getting that going, and then I'm going to add my garlic. Now fresh garlic is really nice in fried rice, but I didn't have any fresh garlic on hand. And once that has gotten a head start, I'm also going to pop in a little bit of ginger. Ginger is a really nice flavor. I really like it. You could obviously use dry ginger as well if you don't have fresh ginger or canned ginger on hand. So that's getting really fragrant and beautiful at this point. And now I'm going to be adding my protein. So I'm going to be adding my prawns. The tricky thing with prawns is that because they're quite small and these are already cooked, I do definitely not want to overcook them. So we're talking, 2 to 3 minutes of cooking time when you're doing prawns, because otherwise you're going to risk that they get really dry and lose a lot of flavors. So what I'm doing here is just mixing them in with my seasonings, getting them to simmer with all that beautiful oil. And I normally just put the lid on for a minute or two, which works out really well. And when that is looking nice and beautiful, I just take that off the heat and put it to the side so I can continue using the same pan, because this pan already has all those beautiful flavors and oils and things like that in it. Alright, adding a tiny bit more oil because we're going to add now the frozen vegetables. I'm chucking in a little bit more of my ginger, but again, do whatever you want. There are no rules for this. I was a bit lazy on this particular day as well. I'd forgotten to thaw the veggies out, so I just throw them in frozen, but that doesn't really matter because you're kind of preparing things in stages here. So just let that get going, and normally for it to heat through properly, I just leave the lid on it for a little bit, which allows it to cook, and then give it a stir every now and then because you obviously don't want it to burn. This is the great thing though about frozen vegetables. I like using frozen veg because it is actually really lovely and fresh, and frozen veg are frozen when they are very fresh. So, it is actually really good for you and a really budget-friendly alternative. Now I've got my cold brown boiled rice here. I think I boiled about 1.5 cups of dry, uncooked rice, which turned out to be quite a bit. I was joking about this in a previous video. I always cook way too much, but it's actually nice because it means that, this will last great in the fridge for a couple of days. So we can have leftovers for dinner if we have a busy night or a busy week. So you saw there that my veggies were all done, and I've added in my rice and just giving that a really nice stir. And now I'm going to add, you could do soy sauce as well if you wanted. I just had coconut aminos on hand and a little bit more of the sesame oil. I really love both sesame oil and sesame seeds. I'm also adding oyster sauce. I would typically do like a fish sauce or something instead, but we just happen to have this in the house and I just want to use it up, and it's still still good, so don't want it to go to waste. So just using that and giving everything a really good stir around. Normally at this point I have my heat on kind of medium high, and then I did decide last minute to add a little bit of chili as well. My partner likes a bit of kick, even though you can obviously add seasoning and spices afterwards as well. So now that the rice and the veggies have, really blended together, I'm adding the egg back in. And obviously the egg was already cooked, so you don't need to be cooking this for very long. You will tell pretty quickly that it's, when it's looking ready. And then I'm adding very last, like I said, with prawn, you don't want to overcook prawn. Sometimes I do this with tofu, and I normally cook the tofu in the oven instead. I'll leave a recipe below for that if you're interested to do that. But in that case, I wouldn't even add the tofu to the pan. I would just add it on top of the food later on. And it turned out so tasty. This was like a giant, you probably can't tell, but it's a pretty big pan. And this is what we normally serve it with. So some sesame seeds, if you have that. My partner likes to add gluten-free soy sauce and hot dried chili flakes. So pretty big serve there, and this is what it turned out looking like. It's so I've served out 2 portions already, and that's how much I've got left. So I've got plenty of dinners for the fridge for that week. And finally, we're doing the easiest bread in the world. All you need is some yeast, some salt, flour of your choice, and some lukewarm water. And that's all you need for this recipe. So it's not necessarily the healthiest bread, but I opt for easy. And it's not too bad because I normally do about half and half of white flour and wholemeal flour, which you'll see me add here. I will leave the recipe linked below for this bread. I got it originally from Frugal Fit Mom here on YouTube. So I normally do slightly more white flour than wholemeal. So that was just over 1.5 cups of white flour and just under 1.5 cups of wholemeal flour. And then just adding my yeast and my salt, and then I'm going to stir up here my dry ingredients to make sure they're combined. And then I'm going to go and get my warm water. So make sure this is not hot. You want about 1.5 cups. So I added the first cup, and then you'll see me put the second cup next to me there while I'm mixing it, because it depends on your apartment, the climate you live in, the time of year. Sometimes you need more or less water. So I recommend to add that last 1/2 cup very gradually, because you'll see here that I actually did not need all of it. So just mixing that all together really well and scraping it off. And I'm going to do a quick sort of knead just with my hand to make sure that it is like fully combined and the right texture. Now, I make this bread all the time, but you will learn pretty quickly that, it doesn't take much to get it to this point. And then all you want to do is cover this up with some kind of cloth or towel and let it rise for at least 8 hours or so. Normally I find if I do this at night and then I get up early in the morning, so I've turned my oven on there, it's 6:51 in the morning, and this is what it looks like 12 hours later. So I'll often prepare the dough at night, and then in the morning I'll get up and do this quickly, and then I can have fresh bread for breakfast, which is really, really nice. So this one had been rising for about 12 hours, and so I'm just going to get a little bit of flour out and get my dough ready. And you saw that the my bread tin is already in the oven, heating up with the oven. So just working on that dough a little bit. Again, you don't really need to do a lot to this because it's not a smooth bread. It's meant to be like a crusty, beautiful bread. So just giving that a little bit of love, and then getting my tin out of the oven and popping the bread into it. Nothing fancy, you don't need to grease the pan or anything, just as it is. And what you want to do is cook it for 30 minutes covered. Now, if you had a Dutch oven, you could obviously use that. I don't, so I just use a little bit of foil to cover it up and pop it in the oven. So that's what we're going to leave it to do for about half an hour, and then you're going to come back after the half hour and take off the cover, whatever you've been using. It's going to look like this, but it needs a little bit longer still, so we're going to pop it back in for another 15 minutes, so 45 minutes in total. let it do its thing, and then it looks like this. And it is such a wonderful bread. I really, really like this. I have never really been a big fan of baking, etc., but I tell you, it tastes really beautiful. And how I store my bread is that I will cut it up in slices myself and freeze it in just a good freezer bag. But this bread is so beautiful with soup, just as toast, really, really nice and very cheap. Those were the recipes for today. I hope you enjoyed them and found them inspiring. As you can probably tell, most of these recipes you can vary however you like. You can make them with meat or other proteins. You can make them vegan, vegetarian, whatever you desire. And what I really like about especially something like fried rice is you can throw anything in there that you need to use up, whether it's frozen veggies, fresh veggies in your veggie drawer, and you know, it's a reasonably easy thing as well to hide things in if you cut them up really small, if you've got fussy kids at home as well. So I hope you enjoyed this. Feel free to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. It really helps my channel out. And if you haven't already, please join as a subscriber down below. I'd love to have you as part of the channel. I'll be sharing more meal planning and budget type videos coming up as I continue to empty out my fridge, freezer and pantry. But if you have any specific things you'd like me to cover, please leave a comment below. I really do appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you in the next video.